Oh man, you guys, I really want to get this episode started, but I'm trying to do this connect the dots, and somebody erased all the numbers. I don't know what it could be. Theme song. Okay, everybody, episode 4 of series 4. This is Connect the Dots. And in this one, I'm going to explain to you my 2 rules for analysis. Now, wait a minute, Bullock, you are saying. You already gave us 2 rules for analysis way back in episode 1. And I did. It is true. We had the no Waldo's rule and the Ebert rule. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say those things, you may want to go back and watch episode 1. I'll put a link below, although it should be pretty easy to find if you're on this one. Here's the deal. Those 2 rules are very, very important to analysis, but they're not named after me, right? This channel is called Bullock's Rules for Writing. I don't want a rule named after Waldo or a rule named after Roger Ebert. I mean, love Roger Ebert. Waldo, I don't know, seems okay. I get a weird dog. I don't get it. Anyway, I want rules that are named after me. And these 2 rules, they're not really covered by the Waldo rule or the Ebert rule. They're very, very important to a successful analysis, though. So I feel like I've got to talk about them in this episode. So here we go. Bullock's first rule of analysis. Quality analysis eschews recapitulation. Now this is very important. You don't understand what that means? I was afraid of that. We're gonna go with plan B. Got it? Trying it again. Bullock's first rule of analysis, no recaps. See, here's the deal. You are going to be tempted when you're doing an analysis, if it's a rhetorical analysis of an argument or a literary analysis of a poem or a story or a novel or a play or whatever, you are going to be tempted to retell a lot of the text in your analysis. When you're writing about Romeo and Juliet, you're going to want to tell the story about how these 2 star-crossed lovers came from these 2 separate families, and through a whole lot of difficult machinations, they were able to finally come together. But then, the families are angry, and Romeo kills Tybalt, and there's all this. Okay, you see the problem there. Whoever assigned you to write an analysis of Romeo and Juliet knows the story of Romeo and Juliet. This is your English teacher, right? English teachers go for a very long time to English teacher school where we read all of the Shakespeares. So when you're writing that analysis, you don't have to tell the story. You can just jump right into what you want to say about the story. Now I know, you're probably thinking, but Bullock, man, I've been doing this for years and I get like 400 or 500 words out of a recap of the story. Still, don't. In fact, here's what I want you to think about. When you're writing an analysis, I want you to think about your audience, the person that you're writing to. And I know it's probably actually your English teacher or your social studies teacher, some teacher. But here's what I want you to think about as your audience. I want you to think about your audience as a fellow student who doesn't get it. They read the same text you did, but they don't see the things about the text that you see. That means you don't have to tell them what happens in the poem or what happens in the story or how Romeo and Juliet fell in love and then at the end they both died. Spoiler alert if you don't know. But you can just get right into, well, I think this about the text. I think this is what it means, or I think this is how the pieces work together to create meaning. No recaps, okay? Which brings us to Bullock's second rule of analysis. Connect the dots. Back in our series about arguments, that was series 3, I talked about the classic style. The classic style being you are an expert as the writer, you've got a particular worldview, you see things that other people do not necessarily see. And it's your responsibility as the writer to to make sure that other people, your audience, see as clearly as possible what it is that you see. When you're writing about literature, typically your claim, the thesis statement in your literary analysis, or even when you're writing a rhetorical analysis of a piece of informational text, your claim is going to be either what the text means, like the theme of the text, what the author is trying to show us, or how the text works to get us to that theme. What important choices and techniques has an author made and used to get us from point A to point B? Remember, the only rule you really need to know is that writers write what they write on purpose. When you're doing an analysis, you are talking about those choices that the authors have made. But it's not any good to talk about those choices unless you're able to say, here's what I think, here is some evidence from the text for what I think, and here's the connection between that evidence and what I think. In other words, just like in an argument, you have to have a claim, you have to present evidence for that claim, and you need a warrant or a link between that evidence and your claim. An analysis really is just a fancy kind of argument, where your argument is not we should abolish the death penalty or abortions for everybody, but rather your argument is this is how this text works. This is how the poet makes the poem happen. This is how the playwright creates tension so that we are waiting on the edge of our seats when Romeo wakes up and sees Juliet slipping away, unless it was the other way around. I really didn't prepare the Romeo and Juliet part of this. It was all improv. But you know what I'm saying. Your argument in an analysis has to be solidly proven with evidence and links. You have to connect the dots. Now, I'm going to dig into this a little bit, and I'm going to use another sample poem. I'm going to put it up, as I have done previously, I'm going to put it up on the screen for about 5 seconds, but I want you to hit pause so that you can read the whole thing. This is Saturday at the Canal by the poet Gary Soto. Here we go. All right, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that poem. So if I were going to do an analysis of this poem, this would be my claim. I would say something like, in Saturday at the Canal by poet Gary Soto, the speaker and his friend want desperately to get away from their high school, their crappy town, and make it to someplace cool like San Francisco. And in the process of revealing that, Gary Soto uses the canal and its water as a very clear symbol for what the boys are feeling. You didn't get that? I mean, I thought it was, well, anyway, here is how I would connect the dots. So keep that claim in mind, that this is a poem about these two kids who want to get out of their crappy town, and the water is really a strong symbol for it. So I need to defend my first part of my claim, which is that the boys hate their high school. So take a look. I would point to some things like the sharp check mark in line 2. I mean, those are some pretty harsh sounds. When you talk about the sharp check mark, this is not soft and cuddly, high school is great talk. This is like terrible. Or the obnoxious tuba in line 3. What about those old teachers, like me, who don't understand in lines 4 to 5? How about these stinky hallways in line 6? Every single one of those things, the obnoxious, the old, the stinky, and the all of that, every single one of those things carries a significantly negative connotation. This is not a kid who has tremendous school pride and will fight anybody. Because if you have school pride, and here's my warrant, you see what I'm doing? If you have school pride, you are not going to talk about your school as having stinky hallways and old teachers and obnoxious tubas playing at the pep rally. You see what I did there? I had my claim that these kids hate their high school and they want to get away from it so bad. You may recognize that feeling. My evidence was things like the sharp check mark and the obnoxious tuba and the stinky hallways. And when you care about your school and when you love your school, when you are having a good time at high school, you don't use language with those kind of negative connotations. I also, part of my claim was that Soto and his friend, it may not be Soto, the speaker and his friend will say, they hate their crappy town. How can I tell that? Well, look at the way he describes the scenery. There's the dusty ground there in line 9. The talk about San Francisco as being a postcard up on the bedroom wall, like, this is my dream. You know, you've got, it says dream, and then you put the postcard and or vacation. And anyway, like, it's there on his wall as something he aspires to instead of his crappy town. The 3 chords on a guitar. I mean, if that's all the people in their crappy town know how to do on a guitar, well, I mean, I could teach them. I have to charge them and, make new business. You know what? I won't. But it's not hard to learn a 4th chord. So it is supposed to be a really crappy town. There's the shadows of loneliness gripped loose dirt, lines 16 to 17. I mean, can you imagine something more desperately sad than the shadows of loneliness? I did that because I don't know how to add an echo in my film editing program. Okay, and if you don't believe me with that evidence, you can take a look at line 19 where he says, literally, we wanted to get out. If you like where you're living, you don't put a postcard on your bedroom wall. You don't say, we wanted to get out. You don't call it dusty and complain about how little the guitar players know. Again, claim. They wanted to get out of their crappy town. Evidence. We wanted to get out. Warrant. If you want to stay, you don't say you want to get out. And finally, I made the claim that the water is a significant and important symbol in the poem for a couple of reasons. One, and this is something that you should perhaps remember for all time, when you're reading literature, water always means something. Think about many of the significant books or stories or poems that you have read, and think about how much water factors into them, from the biblical flood in Genesis all the way through the Mississippi River in Huckleberry Finn up to this particular poem. Listen, though, to the way Soto describes, or the way the speaker describes, the canal. Our eyes followed the water, white-tipped but dark underneath, racing out of town, lines 20 to 21. The water has 2 distinct layers. There's this surface level, what you can see at a glance, but there's this darkness underneath, this mystery or this churning, this depth that is not adequately conveyed by the white tips on top. Soto, the speaker, is making this implicit comparison between himself and the canal. That here he is with his friend, and they want to get out of this crappy town because there's more to them than just surface. There is depth to them. There is a 4th or a 5th chord on the guitar for them. They want San Francisco instead of this dusty, shadows of loneliness kind of place. When an author wants to put in a symbol, it needs to adequately reflect what it symbolizes. And in this case, the double layer of the water represents the 2 layers that the speaker feels about himself. And what is the water doing? It is racing out of town. The water, unlike Soto and his friend, has an escape. It is able to get out of this town. The boys, they want to get out, but they can't. The water, on the other hand, gets to flow free. Once again, claim the water is a symbol that really helps to sell this whole the boys want to get out of the crappy high school and the crappy town. The evidence that the water is white-tipped but dark underneath, that the water is racing out of town, and the warrant. That dual nature of the water represents the dual nature of the boys, that they feel that there is depth and darkness underneath, and the water has the ability to leave town where the boys are trapped. And if the speaker didn't want the water to be a symbol that way, the speaker wouldn't have made it so obvious that the water represents them. So there we go. Bullock's 2 rules of analysis. Number 1, no recaps. That whole time I was talking about the Gary Soto poem, I didn't spend a lot of time telling you about what happened in it. You should not, when you write your analysis, either. And rule number 2, connect the dots. An analysis is a kind of argument, so you have to have that claim. What does the text mean, or how does the text work to make that meaning? You have to have evidence. Quote from the text what words, phrases, sentences, lines provide that evidence, and then you have to link that evidence back to your claim. Just like in any argument, you have to have the claim, the evidence, and the warrant with a link. Next time, we're going to get slightly more practical, and I will talk about some very specific ways to begin a literary analysis and how to begin a rhetorical analysis, which I haven't talked a lot about yet in this series. But we're going to talk about opening paragraphs for analysis in the very next episode, so come back and I will see you for the next one. You know, I'm never going to get on Mount Rushmore, nobody's going to build a statue, but these digital videos, I'm certain, are going to last forever on this particular free medium that we all can access now.